Good evening, welcome to Worldview Live on GBC 24, where we tell the story of Africa. Not too long ago on this same platform, we were here to talk about what was happening in Myanmar, and in fact it's still happening, where girls as young as 11 years are gang raped, human beings killed in a more dastardly manner. You thought it was far away from you. Fortunately or unfortunately, as we speak, human beings are auctioned as low as $400 in Libya. That is the story that you and I should be concerned. Many are wondering what is happening to us, and if you've been following the politics of the continent, our founding fathers, the Patrice Lumumbas, the Kwame Nkrumah'S and the others fought very hard to give us the dignity that we deserve. Today here we are, and so the thrust of our meeting this evening is to examine what is the state of Africa and how can we reignite the Pan-African movement, which will give life, real life, meaning and values to the human beings. Today in the studio, I have the national coordinator of the Pan-African Federalist Movement, and they held a meeting here in Accra. He will be telling us more about that meeting and the essence of that and where we can situate that and all the disturbing things that we happen on the continent. Ernesto Yebua, good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
And he is also the president of the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Movement. So, sharp. When I say sharp, many would don't understand that. Next to Ernesto is the Honorable Samia Yaba Nkrumah. She is a former member of Parliament and is the former national chairman and national chairman and leader of the Convention People's Party, the CPP, and she believes in the ideology of the Pan-African movement. Good evening, Honorable, and welcome.
Good evening to you.
And next to Honorable is Iribad Ibrahim. He is a security analyst and is the CEO of Iribad Security Consult. Iribad, good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for having me as usual.
Well, I'll start right away with Ernesto. First of all, before we come to the Pan-African Federalist Movement, when you saw video footage and the news cable about what's happening in Libya, how did you feel as a young man on the continent?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening once again to you and to our wonderful viewers. A quick correction here. I mean, Honorable Samia Nkrumah is the president of the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center. Okay. So, just by way of correction. But back to the situation in Libya. I mean, no human being should be happy with, I mean, such inhuman treatment meted out to, I mean, a fellow human being. And so, irrespective of the race, the color, the ethnic origin, extraction, whatever, I think that it is something that should never happen to any human being, to be reduced to such low depth of, how do you call it, a commodity, a product, to be sold for others to even bargain on how much you are supposed to be sold and all of that. I think is the most dehumanizing situation or condition that anybody would find themselves in. And it's sad that from where I sit, it's happening on the African continent, where one would have thought that if not for anything at all, we share a common geographic, I mean, space. Beyond that, we are merged in, how do you call it, many organizations and unions, foremost being the African Union, which aims to unite the entire, I mean, continent along certain lines and all of that. So one would have thought that all of these collaborations from, I mean, all the fronts would have at least spoken to the consciousness or conscience of our brothers in Libya, in how they are treating other, how do you call it, Africans. Unfortunately, that didn't register enough, and far away from, how do you call it, piling the blame on them, I would rather want us to examine the conditions or what has led to that kind of a situation, because human beings in their highest levels of civilization in one breath could also be reduced to near animals, given the type of conditions that they are provided with. Somebody who would, be very watchful of, let's say, even the type of water they want to drink and all of that, the food they want to eat, in one condition, you would find such same persons ready to even drink, a cup of gutter water just to be able to survive. So when human beings are subjected to certain conditions, it also creates that environment for injustice, for inhumane treatment, for lives of indignity and all of that. And I want to believe that this is what the people of Libya have been reduced to. This is a country once upon a time where it had the most successful leadership that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
One of the most successful leadership. In fact, directly opposite the White House are people living in cardboards. The poorest Libyan under Gaddafi, had 2 cars. If you, are able to get married and you are supposed to move out of your parents' homes, the state had provided an accommodation facility for you. And apart from that, you are getting $50,000 just to start life. So all of these things, free education from primary to university. The people of Libya were one of the choicest of the world under Gaddafi. And this is the kind of country that once upon a time existed, only for the machinations of Western imperialist forces to engage that country in a manner that reduces this beauty to rubbles. And this is where we are now, where today Libyans are selling their fellow
human beings.
Human beings.
It's quite sad. But Honorable Samia, I listen to, and I like listening to tapes of your father. And when I am home alone, I listen to him, the things he said many years ago, and I juxtapose that with what is happening, the exact opposite. You are the president of the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center. When you hear and see what is happening, how do you feel?
Yes, I'm reminded yet again that I think we have a mission to accomplish. I think every single African, young or old, must come to the realization that there are things we have to do in order to complete our full independence. I don't want to think that those who suffered and sacrificed for our national liberation did that in vain. That all the sacrifice, all the resistance and resilience has been in vain. No, that cannot be. But this is yet one other demonstration that we, as Africans, we have not completed our task. And that our national independence must and should have been followed with our economic independence, regaining control of our economies, of our resources. God has endowed us with wonderful resources, rich, fertile land, abundant resources, everything, every single mineral you can think of. But we are poor because we are not in control of those resources. We are poor because those resources are not giving us the revenue and the money that would enable us to take care of our youth, our sick, you know, and generally to just uplift our nations so that we can be, enjoy, our people, Africans can enjoy a reasonably good living standard of living, and compare ourselves really with the rest of the world.
When you look at post-independent leaders, Patrice Lumumba, your own father, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and all their guys, what they stood for, and you look at their successes and what we have today, do you see any hope?
There must be hope. As long as we are here, there must be hope. But let us not forget that these leaders lived by ideologies, by principles. There was a strong ideology. We've just spoken a bit about Pan-Africanism, which was just one of the pillars, you know, of that ideology. So they fought for our independence, but with also realization that this is just part of, you know, the emancipation project. Ghana's emergence as a modern independent state was never meant to be in isolation. That's what Kwame Nkrumah said. You know, he never thought of Ghana in isolation. And he realized, like those leaders you're talking about, all these pioneers of African unity, they realized that we will never make it alone separately. You know, a visionary leader or leaders see in time, see into the future, and prepare for generations to come, for a few decades ahead. And they could clearly see that if we don't pool our resources together, we are going to struggle. Our people will struggle. You know, our people will struggle to educate ourselves and our children, to enjoy basic health services, to enjoy basic utilities, water, sanitation. They could see that and try as much as they could in your own individual country. You can do your utmost, but the global system would not allow you to survive with dignity. And Kwame Nkrumah said that the economic and political unification of Africa, of the African continent, is key, is the master key to African survival. So if we want to survive with dignity, because we can continue to survive as we are doing, but if we want to survive with dignity, then we have to seriously revisit political unification.
Very bad. As a young man, your grandfather, your father, they taught well, they worked hard, and you just grew in, only to see that what they thought, the opposite is what is happening, to the extent that human beings can be auctioned. How does that make you feel?
I think we shouldn't belabor the point, and I believe the consensus around this table is that the toppling of Gaddafi was a tragedy. For so many decades, if not centuries, people south of the Sahara had been traveling to Libya to seek greener pastures or use it as a conduit to reach Lampedusa in Italy. Only 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when Gaddafi was alive, we didn't see human beings being turned into merchandise the way we see it done quite overtly today. So I would blame this on in part, and Honorable Samia and then Ernesto made quite an allusion to the fact that yes, neo-colonialist, influences on the continent, because France, the UK, and the US, including Italy, the former colonial masters of Libya, beguiled the UN Security Council. China and Russia would have vetoed any military intervention, but they said on the back of the speech by Gaddafi, when he said in Arabic, "Sa'azhab ana wal malayin wa sanutahhir Libya shibr shibr bait dar dar zanga zanga," he said he would move with thousands and they would cleanse Benghazi inch by inch, alleyway by alleyway. That was misconstrued by the world to mean that there was going to be ethnic cleansing or there were going to be atrocious war crimes. So therefore, Russia and China were deceived into believing that what the US, the UK, France, and Italy intended was only a no-fly zone to protect the people of Benghazi. But a no-fly zone transmogrified into regime change. And in a private meeting with the Spanish ambassador, we asked why the carnage in Libya. She told us quite frankly that the Western powers they've not reached an agreement as to how they will plunder and pillage the country. That is why there are two parallel governments in Libya currently. There is one in Tripoli and there is another in Tobruk. So therefore, I believe Dr. Nkrumah and all the towering Pan-African figures you've mentioned wanted Africa to be on its own. But unfortunately, as a result of local collaboration with Western powers, look at Comrade Mugabe and how he has been thoroughly demonized by the West. And so your own people are made to turn against you. And the earlier we woke up and smelt the coffee, the better it will be for this.
Do you sense we can ever wake up?
Honorable Nkrumah says there is hope for the future, but look at our curriculum. Look at what we learn in school. You are doing your PhD. What did you learn for your first degree in political science? Most of the time when scholars are quoted, we don't quote, African scholars. For your thesis, your dissertation, even for your master's, chances are 95% of those you quoted were white folks. And so the training itself is a marked departure from the resolute principles Pan-African pioneers stood for. So therefore, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. The current generation of leaders kowtow to the whims and caprices of the West, and we seem to be following in line. So some revolution has to take place. It doesn't have to be military. It has to be one born out of ideology and principles.
That should take me back to Honorable Sanya. The very people who pioneered freedom for Africa were toppled. All the founding fathers. And when they were toppled, their successors were unable to implement what they stood for. Today, the emancipation is taking a more sophisticated dimension. Entertainment, education. And you said there's hope. How should we approach it?
Yeah, there is hope because just listening to two younger at least, people speak the way they do gives me hope. And it means we do understand what is happening to us. We cannot pretend any longer that we don't. I'm happy that a young person is saying that there's something wrong with our education. And we know there's plenty wrong with our education. I am no longer surprised that Kwame Nkrumah's books were burnt after the 1966 illegal overthrow. And I think this nation has lost immensely by the disappearance of Kwame Nkrumah's thoughts in our schools, in our universities. That's just one example. But like we heard, the whole approach to education, the whole curriculum, our total dependence, mentally, ideologically, intellectually, on outside is harming us. And it's making it difficult for us to believe in ourselves sufficiently to take matters into our hands. Now, you spoke about the toppling of many of the independence leaders in the 60s. I mean, it is clearer now why it happened, Any country that tried to forge an independent path to development economically, was attacked somehow. And unfortunately, as you rightly said, when those leaders were pushed out of the scene, our economies, which were following in an independent path, were brought back into the colonial or new colonial fold. And this is where we are today. So part of our feelings of pessimism and impotence and and confusion is lack of control over what God has blessed us with, our land, as we were saying earlier. And that realization alone, it's sufficient that we are beginning to realize that. That's the first step. I think the second step, which was mainly your question, the second step is that we have to mobilize and move. If you are aware of that, if you understand that, then all what we have to start doing is to educate ourselves and organize ourselves to resist what we see as an exploitation of African people.
And as to from where Honorable is landing, we have to organize ourselves, but you need power to do that. And it appears that those who have that mindset of ensuring economic independence will be frustrated by the Western powers. They will use resources that you may not have through people within your own environment to frustrate your effort.
Well, that's very true to some extent. The extent that we feel power is only those in the black cars, those in the black suits, those who earn our per diems, feed fat on our taxes, and all of that. And that power is not with you and I, it's not with ordinary people, I mean everyday people and all of that. I think that this is the revolution of thought that has to come with our thinking, that no longer should we allow the current leadership on the continent to privatize power in a manner that they have done, and that power actually resides in us. Without us, they don't exist. So I think that is that consciousness that will lead to that upsurge. And in line with this type of thinking, just about a week or two ago, the Pan-African Federalist movement organized, how do you call it, a sub-regional conference, where the beauty of this movement and how the conference came about, it's not as if we had some big politicians somewhere we have concluded in their thinking that, look, the only way for economic emancipation as a people, as black people, lies in the unity of the continent, the political unification. Now, just look at our current leadership, I mean, on the question of the African unification issue, and you'd realize that they have failed us totally. And it's not just that. Let's visit the African Union itself. And what is that organization telling Africans about the unity of the continent? They are saying that we should give them another 50 years, around 2063. Now let's add 50 to our ages. I mean, how old would we be? Would we even be alive and all of that? So they have shown clearly that when it comes to the unification of the African continent, they are not very interested. Now, in contrast, look at the lives of the people. The people, through their own lives, have shown that they don't respect those boundary lines that were drawn, I mean, on the tables of Berlin, I mean, somewhere 15th November, 1800s. I mean, they have shown clearly. You have somebody who sleeps, I mean, bedroom is in Togo and then has a farm in Ghana. Just visit, how do you call it, the border posts, I mean, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Togo, and see how the natives cross the lines without even being asked any questions. So those who respect the lines consistently has been the political leadership. They are the ones that have found it necessary to mount a custom barrier, an immigration barrier, a police barrier, all to limit the freedoms of people to move in terms of, I mean, building up to our own human and natural aspirations. They have shown, I mean, see how traders suffer, the amount of bribes that has to be paid before goods are conveyed from one, I mean, part of the continent to another. We are not even interacting amongst ourselves. And if you look at global findings on interaction, I mean, in intra-African trade, you'd realize that, I mean, it's less than 3%. So how does a continent, how do you call it, grow when governments have shown to be the obstacles to regional integration or the African integration?
How do you move?
But that's the thing. I mean, we have to start pushing them to we the people. We have to begin, and that's why I'm happy that as part of the resolutions that the conference passed, and mind you, about 3 African countries were represented. I mean, at that conference, we had one from Gambia, one from Mali, the other from Togo and Nigeria. In fact, about 4 of them. So
we have Senegal, Nigeria, Mali, Ghana.
Senegal too. So all of these, Sierra Leone couldn't come, I mean, at the last. But the conclusion for me was endearing, and about the fact
what did
that
you discuss?
We discussed about how the continent, I mean, we as a people should take up the question of the unification of the continent and then answer it on our own without resorting to what, because our leaders have told us that the unification of the continent would be only in about 50 years' time. As to whether that is even going to happen, I mean, they are sincere in their words is another thing, I mean, altogether, because more than 50 years have shown us that they are not committed to the process of bringing about the unification of the African continent. Now, as part of the resolutions, we called on the African Union to include as a matter of urgency on the agenda the need for Africans to be asked the question of whether they want to unite or not, whether they want to enter into a political union with the rest of Africa or not. And that question could only be settled by a referendum. And we have given them out to 2021 to have this fully tabled and discussed, and then, I mean, the implementation.
I'll come back to you to tell me more, but Iribad, when you champion a cause, and you know the people with the power are really the quote-unquote the traitors who will want to frustrate your effort, how easy or difficult would your task be?
I think for so long people have understood that the methodology that is used by our former colonial masters is the divide and rule, tactic. Today, ECOWAS leaders sit and they discuss issues, but those who take concrete decisions may not live to see the next meeting because there's going to be an election. I keep saying, how often you change governments does not have a telltale effect on the level of development and unity we want to see on the continent. Dr. Nkrumah did in 9 years what subsequent regimes that came and went have not been able to do. So therefore, for me, I think we only pay lip service to the issue of unifying this continent. Dramani Mahama was part of certain resolutions that were taken as chair of ECOWAS. He is no longer in power. So the slate is wiped clean because you are talking about a new crop of leaders. And so therefore this
thing for their tea and then...
So I think democracy and elections are meant to give a leeway for Western powers to penetrate our resolve and weaken us. Because for all you know, anybody who is elected into power does not have any security. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo as our president may do well, talking about free SHS and other lofty policies, but by the second year, he and his government will be fighting for political survival. So all of our resources will then be channeled into winning the next election. We need to do a rethink. I think one governance system cannot be a straitjacket for every geographical part of the world. But who will listen? Who will listen, for God's sake? In the case of Gaddafi, they called him a dictator, an authoritarian. They said there were no liberties, there was no freedom. Those were the same false tags they gave Dr. Nkrumah and other towering leaders on this continent. When you find yourself in the good box of Western powers, then you should do an introspection of yourself. I'll give you the case of Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame bequeathed a country that had been devastated by war. Paul Kagame did 2 terms, 7 years each, and the people said, no, we don't think this guy should go. They did a referendum, they amended the constitution, they said he should go for a 3rd term. And already, someone who started as a pacifier, a darling of the West, gradually is losing favor with the West. Why? Because he seems to be telling people he wants to nationalize the resources of his country. So therefore, when you read between the lines and put 2 and 2 together, you realize that a long-term unification, the thought of a central bank for the whole of the continent, the thought of the use of a legal tender other than the US dollar, all of these things are not in the interest of Western powers. So I don't see any serious resolve on the part of leaders that come and go, leaders with no security whatsoever, to be able to champion a cause that is Pan-Africanist enough and would be able to reach a reasonable conclusion.
Let me carry this to the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center. Continuity of leaders. I remember when this issue of NEPAD started, we had people like John Ajikun Kufuor, President of Ghana, we have Thabo Mbeki, Abdoulaye Wade of Senegal. They had very good plans for NEPAD. Later on, when they left the scene, I don't know where NEPAD is. But democracy says we should go for us in Ghana, 8 years. Then you leave the scene. You don't have that edge. And those who thought of staying longer, our founding president as one, they said he was a dictator. He was overthrown. The very latest is Comrade Robert Mugabe. He is gone. I don't know if there's any other, unless Theodora Obiang Basuku, but I don't think he's even a good case. But from your center, do you think we should amend our laws on the continent? Or?
Okay, our center is mainly engaged and concerned with promoting Kwame Nkrumah's writings and works, because we believe that once they are popularized, they will have a very positive and empowering impact on our young people. But now we are talking about one aspect of democracy, or what we might call political democracy, the right to vote and or freedom of expression. But that is just one side or one little segment of democracy. Democracy is also the democracy of the basic needs. So you have social democracy, economic democracy, and I think we are, particularly in Africa, in countries where we need to industrialize, we need to develop, we need to improve the standard of living of the majority of the people. We cannot just be concerned with political democracy. So we have to widen our definition and deepen it, our definition of democracy, to include the right to education, the right to basic health, and so forth. All the things we were talking about. Now, the whole idea of having a continental body that goes beyond our little countries, the whole idea of that body was to make sure that we can deliver a better quality of life for our people by pooling our resources together. That was the idea. And if you go back to the core values and principles of that organization, which was the Organization of African Unity before what it is today, the AU, the African Union. If you go back to those values, and you will see that we've departed from that. We've departed completely from that. And what happened, what you were just discussing, what happened in Libya, is, I'm trying to imagine, if it had happened in the 60s, what would have been the reaction? I'm sure the countries would have quickly, swiftly demanded that the Libyan government be ostracized, that those who committed those heinous crimes must be brought before the whatever international court of justice, but there would have been swift condemnation. What happened during when Rhodesia, which is today Zimbabwe, when it unilaterally declared independence, Ghana acted swiftly. What in '65? Threatening to leave the Commonwealth, even cutting diplomatic relations with Britain. Its colonial power. What happened when France was going to test its atomic bomb in the Sahara? Ghana quickly acted swiftly. So there was, I mean, those were the values of the organization.
You were not just begging them for handouts.
No,
today you are begging for everything.
And you couldn't just do anything to the African man or woman. You know, you couldn't. There was a completely different set of principles and values that we have abandoned for the reasons we've given now, including the dependence of the organization of that continental body today, which almost over 70% of its programs is funded from outside. I mean, so how can it be? How can it act swiftly?
Dr. Nkrumah's books were banned after his overthrow, but thank God his ideas are still visible today. How penetrating is the center with his ideas, and how cooperative are the people?
We've just started, but one of the first things we are doing is to make his books available at affordable prices, so that every young person can be able to read at least bits of it. And God willing, we are working to make sure that all his books will be available to not only Ghanaian youth, but continentally, and not just in our continent, but every black person, I believe, must acquaint themselves with, wherever they are, Caribbean, North America, Latin America, all over the world. I think the African, whether at home or abroad, as Marcus Garvey would have said, must acquaint themselves with these empowering ideas for our full emancipation.
For us here on Worldview, where we tell the story of Africa, not too long ago, we had a program here, and we had people from the Caribbean, Guyana in particular.
Yes.
They were all here on this platform, and I was surprised the level of knowledge they had about Nkrumah over there. And I look at what the Kwame Nkrumah Chair at the African Studies Department, University of Ghana, is also doing. And it's quite amazing. It appears that outsiders have embraced the idea more than us here. In fact, for us in Ghana, it's even doubted whether the states, the political powers, support the ideas of Nkrumah. And so with that, how do you still make your way out?
Yeah, that is true what you are saying. It's absolutely true, and it goes back, I think, to what Mr. Or is it Dr.
Ibrahim?
Mr. I hope you become a doctor. Yes, I hope you. Yes. So it goes back to what he was saying. About some domestic national politics gets in the way, and it does divide us. And in the process of that division, it weakens us as a nation. So even within our own small countries, we are divided. Tribalism, political differences, and also continentally, we are divided. And of course, someone else benefits from that division. Kwame Nkrumah used to say that the main instrument of new colonialism, and that is the exploitation of African countries. The main instrument of neocolonialism is balkanization, that is division, dividing us into small, unviable states. So we are divided within and we are divided without. So the reason we don't read Kwame Nkrumah, we are not familiar with his ideas, unfortunately, it's because of that the whole domestic politics has come in the way to the detriment of generations to come. But we need to popularize certain grand ideas.
You need money to do that.
Money always comes when you take the right steps. We have to be patient. We are talking about the Pan-African Federalist movement. And the main task of this movement is to popularize the idea of African unity. You see, if we know that our leaders have failed to lead us to unification, then it means it's the people. The task falls on the people of Africa to lead us to unification. And like we just heard, there is something called people power. We simply haven't discovered it fully. We haven't discovered it. Whether you're talking about fundraising or whether you are talking about, lobbying, it is the numbers that count. That is why this new phenomenon of crowdfunding has emerged. If a million people contribute one CD, you have a million CDs. So it's a question of ideas, how to persuade people
to get the ideas first.
Absolutely. Okay. You get the ideas, you get the education, and we will fly.
Ernesto, let me come back to your communique, but still the difficulty with the ideas. I was talking to some young ladies at the University of Ghana. I talked about TV license, my interest, and one was like, oh, GTV, if you were showing that's season 2 or something. And I asked, is that the identity of Ghana? And they were like, but that's what they want. Yeah. But what they want is not what we represent as a state. And so our people are buying into foreign ideas when we have our own ideas that we're supposed to. You are a young guy in town. Do you foresee the people buy into the ideas of Pan-Africanism?
Oh, absolutely. And I have no doubt that the idea is already catching on, because at the conference, I can tell you for a fact that young people dominated. I was thinking that it was going to be the usual 50s, 60-year-olds who may once upon a time, appear at every Pan-African program to share their views and thoughts and all of that. And the conference wasn't going to see anything, particularly different. But I was shocked that amongst many of those who came were actually young people, and people who had, sourced the funding to travel long distances, some outside this country, to come. So the seriousness for me is indicative of a boiling, simmering waves beneath, which can be harnessed any day, anytime. Once we keep on with the education process and enhancing the thoughts of people on the subject. Unfortunately, my brother said, if you look in our textbooks, it doesn't really complement or push forward the agenda for African unity. And for students who have even read government for SHS or secondary schools, part of the reasons why Kwame Nkrumah, for instance, was illegally overthrown, the justification they provide in those textbooks is that Kwame Nkrumah concentrated on Africa to the detriment of Ghana. and because of that, he had to be removed. I mean, in that section of government studies, every lie, I mean, fits for an answer.
And I'm wondering how you reversed. I was talking to a lady who works with the Ghana Commercial Bank. She said, I don't like Kwame Nkrumah. I said, why? The man was spending our money for other African countries, and she was not prepared to listen to any other excuse. That is the first we have.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes you listen to this kind of reasoning, and you ask yourself, is this person who is saying this thing actually thinking? Just a few days ago, your president was, I mean, in Germany. And on the same platform where he was talking about Ghana beyond aid, he's given 100 million and he takes it. I mean, what about that? Should Germans illegally overthrow their government because they have given Ghana I mean, 100 million? So you could tell the lack of critical thinking that the education system has foisted, and I don't want to think that it just emerged. Actually, it's part of a plan. And if you read the NLC's, how do you call it, proclamation, one of the things they set out to do was to de-Nkrumah'S Ghana. De-Nkrumah'S Ghana. So it was a whole project. One of the first places that was attacked was the ideological center. And of course, GBC set on fire, I mean, and all of that. So all of these things, I think that we have gone through. But to see a young person like me today, sitting here, I mean, talking about the reverberation of the ideas of Kwame Nkrumah, it tells you that the book burning didn't succeed. I mean, I went through an education system that should have produced me, I mean, for imperialism. Yeah. Unfortunately, it hasn't succeeded. And there are many people who, I mean, have gone through the system and have seen the system for what it is.
One of the bullets I have in your communique, you want to initiate a United African Festival of Music Icons. You want to do with celebrated artists and others as part of your campaign.
Absolutely.
But the taste of the young people, the young girls, let me put it that way, they are not. When I'm playing Amachi Dede, my sister will say it's Kulu. But when she's playing Celine Dion, the tracks that probably were sung before Amachi Dede start, they are not Kulu to her.
Sure, but it's these same young people that are drawn to the Saminis, the Shatawalis, the Sarkodiers, Obrafors, and all of that. And so we are going to tailor, I mean, these festivals in such a way that every younger person or every generation gets the agenda of music in there represented one way or the other. And we believe that it's the fastest way. I mean, one of the reasons why Bob Marley was killed, and I read this CIA agent who confessed on his dying bed that he actually killed Bob Marley. I mean, one of the reasons why they had to kill the guy was because his music was breaking barriers. It was revolutionary. The ideas, I mean, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds, have no fear for atomic. I mean, these guys are facing you with atomic energy, and he's telling you through song that have no fear for atomic energy. Right. I mean, all our leaders that stood up for you and I were demonized, they were ostracized, and eventually they were killed. Sometimes some people don't simply want to understand. Once you begin to speak in this line, they, I mean, conspiracy theory and all of that. But see what happened to Zimbabwe. What crime did Mugabe commit? Simply because he took the land from those who stole it and handed it to the owners. This is it. And they had to ridicule this guy and the country to the point that anytime you mention Zimbabwe, it was about their inflation. Yet nobody for all these years knew that there were some, I mean, tangible achievements that in spite of the sanctions that were imposed, this country was able to, how do you call it, come up with. People were, for instance, surprised to hear that Zimbabwe is the most, in fact, the country with the most educated group of Africans.
Literally.
Out of every 10 human beings you see in Zimbabwe, 9 of them can read and write.
The street of Harare, you don't see open gutters.
You don't see open gutters. I mean, when was the last time they suffered doomso? I mean, they don't even know what that is. Yet in a free Ghana, we find ourselves 7th on the world's dirtiest, how do you call it, nations on earth. Zimbabwe is nowhere near on that list. So all of these things for me are eye-openers for many people, and they are beginning to see the futility in following in that same IMF World Bank path, in that same Western democracy path that is not helping. Look at somebody like Putin. Vladimir Putin. I mean, this guy has been there. Sometimes he becomes a deputy president, whatever. He comes back
prime minister.
But anybody who has followed Russian politics knows that the man has advanced in terms of his confidence in communicating on global issues and offering, I mean, perspectives and all of that. The confidence, I mean, has grown. So what is it with this 4-year, I mean, type of circus or regime change that, I mean, Africa has been bundled into? We've been made to believe that somehow democracy is when citizens only have political rights, and I mean political rights, and can call on a radio station or a TV station, criticize government, and have the opportunity to vote every 4 years, but have no power over the ownership and control of their resources. Okay. So this is where we are.
Our time is fast running. We have just about 7 minutes to leave. But everybody, with all these beautiful ideas, the Pan-African Federalist Movement came out with a communique, and one says to unite all Pan-African organizations by reaching out to them. They want to educate the youth on Pan-Africanism and its relevance to our collective well-being. Aim to bring Pan-African education to the people through the establishment of clubs at the basic school level, and that aim for more youth and women involvement in education and mobilization process, and so on and so forth. You want to mobilize not only the intelligentsia but sports icons and so on and so forth. Whilst you are trying to do this, the IMF, the World Bank, they are there dictating what you should do. The human rights movement are there dictating what you should do. The Western powers elsewhere are determining who should be the president of which country or not. In Libya, for instance, there's somebody they support. 2 regimes, they think UN-backed regime, which is not even popular. So in the midst of all these things, how should we maneuver our ways out?
I think I would commend Honorable Sami and Ernest, and then the Center for what it is doing. Mass movements always suffer antithetical responses from the world order. And therefore, this is grassroots mobilization. It's going to be capital intensive. Honorable Samia mentioned crowdfunding. I would recommend GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com is a very, potent way of seeking funding from people in the diaspora, people that are Pan-Africanist in their outlook here on the continent as well. I would really want to fund such an effort in my own small way, so that they will have the finances. And so when we go cap in hand to the IMF, why would the IMF give a conditionality to an African government? And it says, your young folks spend like 18 or 20 years to go to the university, and they come out and they form an association for unemployed graduates. And IMF says you don't have the right to employ them. This just doesn't make sense. Can you go to the US and tell them not to employ graduates? You can't. So therefore, once someone wants to clip our wings, someone wants to cripple us, and therefore if we don't wean ourselves off the handouts you were talking about, they take the cookies and give us the crumbs. In most cases, I believe it's going to be very difficult. Ghana's government will not support anything like this. So therefore, crowdfunding and GoFundMe would be very helpful. And again, Ernesto, you mentioned a festival of iconic musicians coming around. I didn't live in the 60s. But I don't think Dr. Nkrumah would have been what he became if he was a replica of a modern-day young person, a person who listens to profane music, dances to one corner, for example. We need a new generation of youth that are filled with sobriety. Our youth are just not sober. Our girls watch soap operas and we watch EPL. You understand? So therefore, you see, we continue to be tied to the umbilical cords of our former colonial masters. Look at the peak time when we watch television, maybe from 7 up to 11 p.m. These are moments of reflection. Town hall meetings, young folks coming together. But we spend all of those
watching seasons.
So therefore, when Honorable talks about light at the end of the tunnel, that there is hope, I want to bank my faith in the fact that
I like
she
faith.
has,
This one is only faith that will make
she has the blood of Dr. Nkrumah, a direct descendant, a direct daughter of a very great man, and therefore I believe in every word she says. But I believe we need to continue to educate the youth.
But you need people with such visions to lead. But in our democratic settings, to keep people like that in a particular organization for 3, 4, 5 years, they will say, hey, she's a dictator, he's a dictator. Step aside for somebody to come. And the person taking over may not.
Look at social media, for example. WhatsApp and Facebook should be avenues for us to share lesson notes. But they've turned to be avenues for us to leak sex tapes.
Yeah.
We spend hours on end writing pigeon on WhatsApp. When in fact these are areas we can share literature, get better educated. So therefore I think it's a mentality problem and we need a complete overhaul, or else we'll continue to languish.
Let me go to Honorable Samia for her last remarks on this discussion before we leave here.
I like how we are ending, because we are ending on education, you know, on mental emancipation, and I think that is where, that is the arena, really, where we have to be working. It's on our minds, and particularly on young minds, you know, the future minds. And it has been done before. It can be done again. Systems of injustices have been overturned. You know, slavery came to an end. Hard work, sacrifice, because in addition to education, we must factor in the sacrifice. Some people have to sacrifice to make things change, to make genuine change happen. But it is possible. It is possible with education, with ideology, with perseverance, and with a measure of sacrifice, persistence and sacrifice.
I pray so. Ernesto?
Yeah, I don't want to add anything, to what she said. I think she's nailed the point. It's education, education, education. Once people are educated, they are informed, and the rest, is history, because you cannot just do nothing after you have received education, after you have received the truth, and you know what the lies are. And I want to believe that going forward, that should be our focus: education, education, education.
Education, 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 and all too soon we've come to the end of this interesting conversation. Somebody was here some time ago and he was like, kingdoms come and kingdoms go. So we shouldn't expect that the status quo will remain. Things will change. And well, that is how we end tonight's edition of World View. I've been here with Ernesto Yeboah, and he is the national coordinator of the Pan-African Federalist Movement, and the Honorable Samia Nkrumah. She's the president of the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center, the former member of parliament, and former national chairman and leader of the Convention People's Party. In fact, the party I love so much. And Iribad Ibrahim, he's the CEO of Iribad security consult. My name is George Asekri. I was produced by Celestine Avi. Thank you all for making this program a success. If you go to bed, think Africa, and we change our system. Enjoy the rest of our programs.